Welcome back to my channel. I'm Miguel Benitez, and I am on a relentless pursuit of goodness, truth, and beauty. And this YouTube channel allows you to come on that pursuit with me. And today I have another guest. I have Dr. Zachary Schmoll. He holds a PhD in Humanities from Faulkner University and an MA in Apologetics from Houston Christian University. He currently serves as an adjunct faculty at Houston Christian University and Southeastern University. He's the author of Disability and the Problem of Evil and was the founding editor of An Unexpected Journal. Zach, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Zach and I are graduates from the same PhD program. We got to take a couple classes together, and I also love following Zach's work. He does a lot of great work. His articles, the book that he's published, and then at Unexpected Journal, which I'll link in the show comments here. A great journal that does a lot of the similar kinds of work that we did for this project that we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, an unexpected journal really is a special publication, and I'm not nearly as active as I used to be. Um, However, we have a new issue coming out very soon. Um, Actually, it might be really close to the same day when this video drops. I'm not exactly sure the date they're publishing. However, it it's just so exciting, and it's such a great team of people. So yeah, I was so grateful to be a part of it and to still be a part of it, even in a slightly more reduced role than I used to be.
Sure. Yeah. So, Zach, this is the first video of a series of videos that I'll be making in an attempt to promote a book that you and I have each contributed a chapter to. And it's kind of an interesting story. We won't get into the whole thing here, but basically, after a lot of work, especially by our editor, Jeremy Scarborough, we have a book, and the book should be coming out very, very soon. We don't have a physical copy in our hands yet, but we wanted to go ahead and get this series started. And so the book is basically a duology, right? So there's two volumes in one. So you buy the one book, you're getting two volumes. The first is Disney as Doorway to Apologetic Dialogue, and that's by Jeremy and Pat Sawyer. And then volume two, that's where you and I have contributed chapters. And that is Disney and the Moral Imagination. And there's a number of really exciting chapters that are a part of that work. And so I'm going to be interviewing some of the contributors that I know, a number of us that have either gone through Faulkner's program or are in Faulkner's program, got to contribute to this. I think the last count was like 6 of us that are in some way attached to Faulkner University have contributed to this volume. And so you're the first one. So I just want to let people know a little bit real quick what they can expect. So this is a book that because a lot of people will ask me, well, what's Disney and apologetics, right? What is that? And you can find
Mhm.
much more information than what we can share here today at disneyapologetics.com. There's a website there, and you can certainly check that out. But basically, we've all kind of, in taking different angles, have connected themes and ideas that we see coming up in these Disney stories and these Disney movies, and have tied it to issues regarding faith and apologetics in some way. And so, before we talk about your specific chapter, Zach, have you grown up a fan of the Disney franchise? What role has Disney played for you in your life?
So yeah, I have, and it's actually funny because if you look at kind of my Disney history, so I was born in 1991, just for context, and so I was a golden age of Disney sports movies, which does not relate to this project at all. But I love sports, and so I grew up in that golden era of the Mighty Ducks and a variety of baseball films. So I mean Disney, and so from that you kind of fall into the whole Disney canon, right? So obviously I've seen the classic animated films. You have your Cinderella, you have your Pocahontas, you have Beauty and the Beast, which we'll talk more about later. But you have all of these stories that kind of, I mean, let's face it, they were marketing geniuses, right? So they're all cross-marketed, and you fall into them. So yeah, it I grew up on Disney, and it was admittedly most in the sports realm, but it branched into certainly everything else, just because I mean they're classic stories, classic themes, and classic like plot lines that I mean you still see people replicate it in various ways today. So I mean I guess it's no surprise that I started to love them. Um, but yeah, so it's certainly been yeah, I mean I still have my loyal Disney Plus subscription now, so
Right. Yeah, no, we do too. And I would say I might use it almost as much as my kids use it. So yeah, so I'm a little bit older than you. I'm 86, but that means that as I was growing up, though, it was during this phase of what many refer to as the Disney Renaissance era, right?
uh-huh.
Which starts in 89 and goes to 99. And I think it starts with The Little Mermaid
Yeah.
as kind of that first film in the Disney Renaissance, which I actually talk about in my chapter. And so Disney was, in many ways, for better or worse, and honestly, there were probably some really good aspects and maybe some not so great aspects, but it was
Sure.
a formative storyteller in my life. And so I think there's still this nostalgia factor for me, and there's something about those stories, starting with The Little Mermaid and then going on to, I don't remember the exact order, but Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Lion King
Mhm.
and all of these films that just were really powerful movies for me to watch. And now I'm getting to watch them again with my kids
Yeah.
and seeing them again. And in some ways it's like, oh, there's elements that I hadn't seen before that maybe I don't care for. And yet in other ways, the stories are even more powerful than I could have detected as a kid, you know? And so,
Mhm.
yeah. So for me, likewise, played a major role in as far as the kinds of stories I was taking in as a kid.
Mhm. Mhm.
So aside from kind of your appreciation for Disney and those Disney sports movies, you saw the call for papers, right, about this project in
Yeah.
which that we were doing Disney and moral apologetics. Um, what kind of led you to decide to contribute a chapter?
Well, so you already had to mentioned my work at an unexpected journal, and a large part of what we have done with that publication and what we intended to do from the beginning is connect cultural artifacts to our Christian worldview, and not in the sense that we're trying to force it in and force that, oh, well, there's Jesus when really there's not Jesus. But picking up on common threads and themes um, that would hopefully kind of point towards these human longings, perhaps you could say these God given longings, um, and see how that might point us from uh, what is functionally a secular story, and yet show us something about the human condition, show us something about our heart that maybe makes us want to long for more. So, just as an easy example from Cinderella, for example, it's clear that she is, looking for her Prince Charming, right? It's a common trope in Disney. There's always the prince and the princess. There's always this theme of true love. You see it over and over. And when you think about it, that's a pretty human theme. Everyone wants to find that somewhere and somehow. And yet the reality is, so many people either can't find it, find a warped picture of it, find something wrong, and they wonder, wow, why do I want this thing, but I can't find it? It must not exist, and yet I want it. And I mean, to paraphrase C.S. Lewis, well, not quite to paraphrase, but to steal an image from C.S. Lewis, if you find a longing that nothing on earth satisfies, then perhaps it's of another world. Um, and so I think that's really powerful, and I think Disney stories are uniquely positioned to do that because they deal with so many universal themes, which certainly speaks to their popularity, and tells us why so many people love them. If it's a theme that almost all of us can relate to, um, in some capacity, or a longing that almost all of us can relate to, I, then I think it's valuable and I think it's worth talking about. And so I actually had not, in all of my cultural apologetics work, I hadn't talked about Disney significantly. And I saw this as a great opportunity to, and I knew we didn't have Disney coming up on our unexpected journal lists anytime soon. So I thought, man, I'd love to talk about, well, I will probably get more into this when we talk about my individual chapter, but some of my other academic interests that coincided with Beauty and the Beast and made it a great fit. And I mean, I would be remiss too if I didn't mention that so many of my great friends like you were submitting chapters to this publication. So I'm like, man, I don't want to be the only one that doesn't.
Yeah, don't want to be missing out.
So many
Yeah,
great people.
yeah. So you had some FOMO. You wanted to make sure
Exactly.
you weren't the one left out. Yeah,
But
yeah.
all the Faulkner people are in one book except for me.
You right. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because in some ways this is like hitting one of my major goals, which has
Ooh,
always been I love Disney. My wife and I both love Disney. We were annual pass holders for many years when
yes.
we lived in the Orlando area. And we even had a Disney YouTube channel that she and I ran for a couple of years when we were living in the Orlando
Wow.
area. So
I didn't
yeah,
know that.
so we were really like in on it. And so I've always had this goal of kind of merging those two worlds, like the
Mhm.
academic side, my love for, theology, philosophy, apologetics, and my love for Disney. And so I can't wait to kind of get this in my hands because
Me too.
it's really meeting a goal that I've always had to be able to marry those. And I think the first time I ever thought about this was so someone we probably have in common in our educational past. I got my at Biola. You did it at HCU, but John Mark Reynolds, who
Yes.
started the apologetics program at HCU, he was one of my professors at Biola, and he wrote an article once called "In Defense of the Disney Princess."
Mm,
And it was just more like a blog article, but
sure.
I really enjoyed reading that, and I was just like, this is the sort of thing that I would really like to do for fun, is see these themes and also redemptive themes, because I think a lot of times, and it's interesting that our book's coming out in a time where there's a lot of controversy surrounding Disney.
Sure.
There's a lot of concerns, and I'll speak for myself, and you can certainly chime in, on your perspective. There are some things that I'm concerned about, and there are some
Mhm.
things that I kind of wish Disney were doing differently right now. And yet, I think it's fair to say that Disney and at least conservative Christianity have always had a complex relationship.
Sure.
They've always had some tension, but I think our job should always be to say, despite the disagreements, despite some of the things that we may not agree with, because they are humans and they're made in the image of God, when they tell stories, there
Mhm.
are going to be themes that ultimately served as kind of signals of the
Yeah.
transcendent, right?
Yes. I agree, and well, a few things. You appealed to two of my favorite things in your response. John Mark Reynolds, who was the reason I went to Houston Christian.
Okay.
He had
Yeah.
just moved over there from Biola right
Mhm.
when the Apologetics program started, and
Right.
I had run into him in the Biola certificate program in apologetics, one of his lectures on cultural apologetics. And then, well, everything kind of fell into place for a fully online program. I live in Vermont.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I mean, I wasn't going to move to California or Texas. Um, and I know Biola does a low residency option too, but
Right. Right.
I, but anyway, so yes, John, we have a similar, yeah, role model, if you
Right.
will.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and another, I mean, Signals of Transcendence, you wrote Peter
Peter
Berger, was
Burger.
one of
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
favorites.
Yeah.
So well done. But I agree with you about Disney because, I mean, I agree. First of all, I fully agree. There are directions Disney is going. There are things that Disney has done that I don't um, support, to put it bluntly. I don't appreciate. However, there is, despite all of that, also, I think there's a reality in our world that people are interacting with Disney content.
That's right.
And so it doesn't necessarily mean that have to we have to be discerning. We don't just run in. Maybe, I mean, frankly, it might come down to you pre-screen things before you show them to your children. Um, I don't have any children, but if I did it, there's some things where I might think twice before showing them, even if they're rated PG, for example.
Right.
Um, However, at the same time, I think there is content out there that's very. There are still good stories that are being told by Disney. Um, I just think we need to be a bit more discerning, perhaps. And I think as cultural apologists, I mean, let's face it, when, like you said, there's always been a complex relationship between Disney or really any media in general in conservative Christianity. There's always that tension. And so, I mean, even if we look at even the more classic Disney stories, I, I mean, there are elements of it that are a bit, or that have created a bit of controversy. Um, and so it's always a question of discernment, but um, I don't know that, it necessarily means we throw out all the content. I think there is the opportunity to celebrate what's good, true, and beautiful as well. Um, and so I really think, and I believe the vast majority of our book, or of our volume within the book, um, most of the stories that most of us interact with are what we would call the classics, and they are from the Disney Renaissance period. But there are a few chapters that do work with newer content. Um, in the journal, also, we have run some stuff on newer Disney content. So it's not like it's some barren wasteland. I think it's just perhaps we have to be a bit more discerning.
Yeah. No, that's right. Very good. So let's kind of zoom in a little bit now on your chapter in particular. How did you decide that Beauty and the Beast was the Disney story that you wanted to write your chapter about?
Mm. Yeah. So, okay, first of all, I love the music from it.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could say that about virtually every Disney movie, so that doesn't help. Um, but it actually fit in well with, well, what was my, well, it remains, but was one of my heavy academic interests at the time. I've wrestled with this idea that Diana Glyer, among others, have talked about of intellectual hospitality and how we as Christians ought to um, kind of welcome the world in while at the same time not falling into perhaps more dangerous or destructive elements of the world. As I've also been intrigued by things like Rod Dreher's Benedict option. I've been intrigued by those kinds of projects where the question is, what do we do in response to a culture that might not understand, might not appreciate, might not like our faith? And yet, throughout the Bible, we are commanded many times to be hospitable and to be kind. Even we have to love our enemies. Um, and so when I thought of Beauty and the Beast, I thought, wow, this is really, I mean, the story is, first of all, a violation of hospitality. The Beast is certainly not very hospitable at the beginning. And so in my head, I thought, well, and yet he's redeemed by the end. And so, what a story to look at in terms of combining like my interest of how do we show hospitality, um, how do we kind of transform ourselves into one that loves our neighbor, um, even, I mean, in the Beast case, he's being hunted by the end, and he still is showing mercy to Gaston. And in my head, I thought, wow, there's some ample content here for me to wrestle with not only intellectual hospitality, but more just hospitality in general. How do I think about welcoming people into my life, into my house, into my like church? How do I interact with these questions when they might not um, always appreciate my invitation? Or conversely, how can I avoid being too beastly? How can I not shut people out? How can I not, drive them away, right? Or, I mean, not literally put a curse on myself and turn into a monster, but how, how do I not be the kind of person that, slams the door in someone's face and suffers the consequences from that decision? So,
Yeah.
it kind of met where I'm intrigued in terms of like apologetic engagement, but also, so I had to pick the theme first, and well, the theme was already there. And then when I saw the book, I'm like, oh, this would be a perfect fit to combine. So that was kind of where it came from.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So, we've gotten various sneak peeks at our chapter titles and things like that. And I should let the audience
Hmm.
know your chapter's entitled Christian Hospitality in Disney's Beauty and the Beast: Two Perspectives. And that's because there's actually two parts to your
Right.
chapter. You wrote the first part of the
Hmm.
chapter, and then Neil Foster, who picks up a similar theme but really comes at it from a different perspective, writes the second part of the chapter. So you're both writing about the beast, which I thought was interesting. And to be
Hmm.
honest, it was surprised me. I knew you were writing about hospitality because I'd seen the chapter title
Hmm.
several times. Only recently did we get kind of the final copy sent to us as far as an e-version, and so
Yeah.
I got to read your chapter for the first time. When I think of hospitality in Beauty and the Beast, what actually comes to mind to me are the servants of the
Yeah.
castle. And the idea that in I think it's in Be Our Guest, the song
Hmm.
where Lumiere talks about servants who are not serving, right?
Yes.
And so there's this powerful imagery that as people who are made to serve,
Hmm.
if we're not serving, like something is wrong, right? Something is off.
Right.
Yeah, and so I envision something like that. I was pleasantly surprised when I'm reading about the beast instead of those other characters, but it was a bit of a surprise to me. And that's what's kind of neat about reading a book like this is
Hmm.
you're going to see certain elements of these stories that you had just never considered before.
Yes.
And so you did write on the beast. Um and so being that you're tying, and again, just to let our audience know, I spoke to Zach before our recording. I want to make sure that we don't give away too much because I really want to encourage people to purchase the book, right? So Zach's just telling us a little bit about his chapter, how
Hmm.
he got there. But I really want to encourage people to purchase the book because I think it's going to be worthwhile. So last we heard, the book will be right around $22, and I think it's at 400 pages, something like
Yeah,
that.
it's a
So
big book.
you really are getting two books in one at the price of a regular book, right? And so I want to encourage people to check that out. But tell us a little bit about kind of what your desire is in making this connection. And I want to throw this at you, and just tell me what you think. As I was
Sure.
reading through your chapter, I wrote down kind of a little note that in some ways it seems, at least part of what you're putting forward, is that our hospitality, or our lack thereof, in some ways reveal who we are, right?
Mm.
Is that a fair kind of
I,
point there?
I think that is, yeah. And you're right. I don't want to give away too much, but I
Yeah.
will say I try to interact quite a bit with the parable of the Good Samaritan. Um, and in that story, you're right. People are shown, and what Jesus is saying is you're shown by what you are. The priest and the Levite are on the other side of the road. They walk. They had to pass by one looks, but he walks by also. And the Samaritan is the one who actually demonstrates a true heart, a true servant's heart, a loving heart that cares for his neighbor, um, even at cost to himself. And so I do interact with that story quite a bit in my portion of the chapter. And I think that's important um, when we think about questions of hospitality, because at some point, I mean, being hospitable is going to cost you something. Um, and I don't necessarily mean that to terrify people, but it is true. If if you invite someone over to spend the night talking, well, you've spent time. You take someone out to dinner, you spent money. There are resources, or it's time, and it's time well spent. But I think there's a very real um, kind of cultural inconvenience. We don't like to give up anything. We don't like to sacrifice anything. Um, and hospitality requires that we give of ourselves for the benefit of another person. Um, and so I think that's a theme I really try to hit on. And I won't go through the whole how I see this in the beast, but I will argue I do think you see him moving down this path from the beginning to the end, and I think it's I, I think that it's one of those things that if it gives me hope, because if we can see someone um you know if we can be inspired by a story to recognize that that change is a good and positive thing, maybe we can do it in our own lives too. And that's a big, again, back to my whole research interests, this idea of how can we kind of love our neighbor? How can we do this in a meaningful way, but also in a way that doesn't compromise our convictions? How can we do this? Um, and also in a way that's effective for the kingdom of God. And I think maybe there's a little hint and a little hope that comes out of the Beauty and the Beast. So I don't know. I hope readers see that as well. I hope that's what comes across from it at the minimum. But I
Yeah.
guess I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that that is in some ways, as you talk about your hope for the chapter, I think in some ways that would be most of our hope for the entire project, right? Is this idea that um, there are elements of these stories that are very powerful and should challenge us. They should challenge us to
hmm
think about who we are and who we ought to be. But also, as you talked about before, there are aspects of these stories that cause us to long for more, right? And so I think that it's a reminder to us that not only is what we're longing for, something that goes beyond just what this world can give us,
Mm-hmm.
as you stated earlier. But to stay along, lines of C.S. Lewis, I think we could also say it's a reminder that actually the greatest story ever told is a true one.
Ooh, yes.
And it is the story of Jesus. And so we see this element that is so powerful in something like Beauty and the Beast. And how much greater, after
Mm,
all, you're linking it to the Good Samaritan, right? A story that Jesus tells us.
yeah.
And so to see that, um, is such a powerful thing, and such a powerful reminder that we are in some ways living and participating in the greatest story ever told, and we just need to be reminded of that, right?
Mm, yes, I think you're right on with that. And I mean, really, that's what the whole project of cultural apologetics seeks to do, right? I mean, we realize that as humans, we love to tell stories, we love to hear stories. We've been doing it for as long as humans have been on Earth. Um, it it seems to be a human art form that goes, I mean, even beyond written record. We had oral traditions. We still told stories. Um, and so I think the themes and the um, kind of the images that come out of the stories we tell tells us a lot about our our inner person. So if when you see, for example, when you see a movie by a certain director, you can tell it's that director because the story tends to look a lot like his or her work. Um, and you can see that there's something about them that's being projected onto the screen, even if it's an entirely different plot line. If you see like a Christopher Nolan movie, you pretty much know it's a Nolan movie. They feel similar, even though, I mean, plot wise, they can be all over, different times, places. Um, and I feel like if we zoom that out to the human level, um, I mean, we tell stories about themes like mercy because we want mercy. We tell stories about hospitality because like we want people to welcome us in. We want people to if we go over to someone's house, ideally we want them to open the door and welcome us in. We don't want to be shut out in the hold. Um, or if maybe we've wronged someone, we want them to forgive us. We don't want them to hold a grudge for the remainder of their lives. And so we have these general human themes, and I think that's what's so powerful. And that's I'm really excited about this volume because sometimes, and you can probably relate to this too. When we write academic things, we realize that nobody is actually ever going to read them.
Yes.
Um, because most people don't care half as much as we hear about very niche topics.
Right.
But this is an opportunity to bring something that general society loves and yet elevate the conversation slightly, and help bring people in at an accessible level, yet a thoughtful level. And I think I haven't read the entire duology yet. I'll be honest, I have
Oh,
not
yeah.
read it all.
No. I don't think
um,
any of us except for Jeremy could have at this
yeah,
point. So, yeah.
and Jeremy, yeah, you mentioned him before, but man, what an amazing job he's done.
Yes.
He has been so diligent. But I, from what I have read from certain essays here and there and chapters I've read, I think people are going to be very pleased. They'll find an opportunity to think deeply and thoughtfully about things that they already love, and I, I think that maybe if we start to think that way about Disney, maybe we can think that way about other things. And as Christians, I mean, we have to love God with all our mind too. That's part of the equation. So I think I think this is a great opportunity for um, if you've never dabbled in apologetics before. This is a really accessible entry point, I think. I mean, I I think it's popular yet thoughtfully popular, if you will.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's a great point that I'm glad you made. Perhaps you're watching this and you're newer to apologetics, or you're somebody who's wondering, okay, who is this aimed for, right? Who's the right
Hmm.
audience? Is this gonna just completely go over my head? And for one, I think it's okay that you read something and maybe some of the essays
Hmm.
might go over your head. Like that's okay. Like that's not a problem. But I think, like you said, it's written at an accessible level, and it's a really fun way of getting into apologetics, right?
Hmm.
Because especially if you care about the Disney stories. So in my mind, it's more so who's the audience for this book? If you're a Christian, um, and you have enjoyed some of the Disney stories, it's for you. That's the idea. And if you're not a Christian but have enjoyed the Disney stories, you might actually still enjoy some of the things that we discuss in
Yeah.
the book as well. So really, it's for any Disney fan of any kind, I think, is someone who would take great interest in the book, because it's written at a level that's accessible, but it will challenge you to think. But in some ways, it might increase your appreciation for some of these stories as well.
Hmm. And I don't want to embarrass a friend of mine who I will not mention by name, but I did share. He's a big movie guy, and I shared my section with him. Um, and he he was saying that it really to him, and he's not a Christian, but he was very much. He thought, "Wow, I love thinking about movies like this." He did some like film classes in college, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Wow, this reminds me of doing that kind of exercise that I love so much in college." I'm like, "Yes, it's so much fun to talk about cultural artifacts."
Yeah.
And I mean, for me as a Christian, to bring that element in,
Right.
but even to talk about it with non Christians, that is, it's still valuable because a conversation can happen, um, because it's a shared artifact. I mean, we all, I mean, how many millions of people have watched Disney movies and enjoyed them from all stripes and all backgrounds and all walks of life?
Yep. Yeah. There aren't that many things that somebody can point to that do that,
Yes.
but Disney has accomplished that time and time again, right? So,
Hmm.
so I think that makes it certainly one of the few things that can have that kind of far-reaching influence.
Hmm. Hmm. And maybe, sorry, just one more thought. And
Yeah.
maybe it's the kind of thing. Maybe you're wondering. Maybe you're a Christian and you feel awkward talking about Christian things with your friends. Maybe you don't know what to say and you don't want to feel like you're preaching at them. Maybe you might be able to take a little, I don't want to say instruction from this book, but maybe start thinking about maybe Disney or maybe whatever else in this way, thinking about how do I get better at finding Christian themes? How do I get better at understanding culture in a way that now I can talk about it with other people? So maybe this is even a tactical kind of guide that you can look at and just think about, huh, I've never thought to think about movies like this. I've never thought to break down a movie so that I can have conversations about the deeper themes behind the movie. And we all do that for fun, I think, anyway. But maybe as a practice, I don't know, it might be useful for some people out there to see it done.
Yeah, excellent point. All right, I think that's a great way for us to go ahead and wrap this up.
Mhm.
But Zach, before we go, can you let people know where? I know you have a newsletter that you send out once a month where you let people know the work that you've done, what you've been up to. So where can people find that and find out more about you?
Cool. No, thank you so much, and I really, really appreciate you doing this, Michael. It's been awesome, man.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to watch all the others in the series. Probably the best way to get in touch with me is on my website. It's Zachary D, as in David, Schmoll, and maybe
I'll put
we
a
can put
link
it in
for
the,
sure.
yeah. At the bottom of the homepage, there's a sign up, let me know mention for my newsletter. I like my newsletter. I think it's fun. I think I think it's a good way to kind of share things that I'm reading, things that I'm writing, things that I'm thinking about. I try to add videos like this when I do them, um, just to hopefully provide a little something for everyone. You can also find my book on my website. There's a page for it. I blog less regularly than I'd prefer to. Um, it's hard, man. I'm
Yeah.
bad at being regular. Um, I used to do it so regularly, and now,
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, ZacharyDSchmoll.com is kind of my hub right now.
All right, very good. All right, Zach, thanks again for joining me. And again, we want to encourage everyone, be sure to check out the book. I'm going to have a link to the webpage for the book in the notes. And when we're recording this, it hasn't officially been released yet, but it could be any day now. So please make sure to check out the website and visit it regularly for updates on the book. All right, thanks, Zach.
Thanks.